Let's talk week 6. The 5 most important things that I saw from this weekend of NFL football. We got to start with the Chiefs hosting the Bills. Now, it's a battle for the 1 seed, and the way the standings look at now, which I'll start doing more throughout the season, even though it can be irrelevant at times, is where we are at in the AFC. Buffalo, after that win at Kansas City, the 1 seed in the AFC. Kansas City is 2. Who is number 3? Plucky Tennessee. Every time you look up, you're like, hey, look at Tennessee with a higher ranking. Going in, I wasn't sure that there was going to be an outcome to this game that was going to make me feel one way or the other than I just think these are the 2 best teams in the NFL, right? It's the 2 best quarterbacks, the 2 best teams. I know Philly won again last night. I just don't think Philly is as good as these 2 teams, and I think that's totally reasonable. But I wasn't sure there was going to be an outcome that was going to make me think different, right? And throughout the game, that's kind of what was happening. Oh, the Bills are moving the football, then having some problems in the red zone, which is unlike them. And then Kansas City having their own issues at times. The whole first half wasn't much offensively. I like the Bills' defense better. It's better defensively. It's not much of a debate, even though I love a lot of the personnel changes Kansas City has made and some upgrades there. And I think that defense will only get better because of so many young players that are playing. But then you get the Von Miller factor, Milano, the linebacker, who really kind of, I don't know, unheralded or whatever you want to call him. That guy's a stud for Buffalo. So it's back and forth. And it really is the modern version of Brady and Manning, because we are this lucky that we're going to see Mahomes and Allen face off for at least like 7 years at the least, and beyond that, because of how young they are and how special they are. I don't know that it's going to be Brady and Manning on the resumes. Brady's resume to me is unobtainable. Manning perhaps more obtainable, at least on the Super Bowl wins. Statistically, we're talking about the third biggest passer in NFL history. The difference is, this is like if it were Brady Manning and they were the sickest athletes ever. This is the best version of the modern day quarterback, where I can burn you with a run, but I don't need to do it. But I'll bring it out when I need to. And that's why any running quarterback that comes into the league, I'll be like, that's awesome, but you got to do all the other stuff first. Use it as the extra thing, an extra weapon, not the main weapon. And that's the key of why Mahomes and Allen are so good. One of my favorite stats that I'll track all season long: how do you do on third down conversions? How do you do preventing third down conversions on offense? Buffalo and Kansas City are number 1. And it's the same feeling for both fan bases. The other team has a 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. You're like, normally I feel good, but not going up against one of these guys. And that's the difference. You want to talk more stats? Buffalo right now with this win is number 1 in offensive and defensive DVOA, which is basically, a stat that they use to try to make everything as even as possible. It's adjusted for schedule. That is the first time an NFL team has been number 1 in both those categories after week 6, the first time since Tampa Bay in 2003. So we've covered it. It's the best 2 QBs, the best 2 teams. Kansas City, I thought Romo brought up a great point that if you want to look at some things they don't do as well, because Kansas City's defensive stats are going to match up to Buffalo's, even though it looked like they did a really good job against Allen through most of the game. But Kansas City's having some problems here. Don't know if it's a real thing. Don't know if it's just the short part of the season against number 1 receivers. Mike Williams went off. Pittman had a good game. Evans, Adams, and then Diggs went crazy yesterday. And as Romo was saying it, Diggs hits for a touchdown. You can argue, hey, we were down a corner. Welcome to defensive back depths, or the depth charts in the NFL at this point of the season. Tampa Bay was missing 3 of theirs. Pittsburgh was missing 3 corners and Minkah Fitzpatrick. So it's part of it. We try not to use injuries too much as an excuse. Sometimes you can't say it's anything but injuries, as we'll get to a little bit later. But in this case, I can understand that Kansas City part of the argument. The best part of this is that now it feels like the AFC will run through Buffalo. And I think an even better part of that, other than just what we feel like could be home field advantage, although it feels super easy or super early to just assume, it's going to be in Buffalo and Kansas City's going to have to go up there. It's that if it were the other way around, if Kansas City ended up being the number 1 seed and you'd have a rematch of Buffalo at Kansas City, if you're a Bills fan, you don't have to hear about how, can the Bills really get it done down there in Arrowhead? Even though both of these games are about as close and as even as you could get them. And I wouldn't say that there's some weird hangover. There'd be some storyline bullshit that you'd have to deal with. And now you don't have to deal with that because, one, the Bills won there, and if it were to work out, you feel like, hey, they already beat him in week 6, so why can't they do it again in the playoffs? But, it could be a really cold game for Kansas City going up there. And honestly, Buffalo should be 6-0. I know there's plenty of teams that could play that game where they start messing with all the what-ifs in their schedule, but that Miami game was such a fluky, weird win, as we had covered before. So, number 2, the NFC contenders. How do you feel about them? Well, at least the ones we thought were going to be contenders. Let's not focus on the standings now as much as Tampa Bay. They lose at Pittsburgh. They're 3-3, though. They're still first in their division. The Rams are 3-3. Green Bay loses to the Jets, and the Niners lose to an Atlanta team that's also 3-3. Atlanta's another one of those teams where every single week you're like, wait, Atlanta's in this game? They've been in every game this season. So the Niners on the injury front, that's where I actually think we can apply the injury excuse, because by the end of that game, it was brutal. I'm going to sound familiar, Niners fans. So I'm going to put the Niners off in a separate category because I don't know what to make about my concern with them, because I still think defensively, when all the guys are there, it's one of the 5, maybe 3 best defenses in the NFL. Green Bay, we're going to get to. Let's focus on the Rams and Tampa. But before we do that, if we look at all 4 of these teams, look at the scoring drops from last season to this season. Tampa averaged 30 a game last year. They're at 20 a game, minus 10. The Rams were 27 a game last year, 17 a game this year, as far as their offensive scoring output, down 10. Green Bay, 26.5 points per game, now 18, minus 7.5. The Niners down about 5 points from 25 points per game to 20. So that combined from those 4 teams, their scoring for last season compared to where they're at this season is a combined 32.5 less points per game between those 4 teams. Brady, his lowest QBR since we kept track of the stat. Was it the wedding with Kraft? How does that affect the legacy rankings with Bill going back into Cleveland 31 years later, and getting a win against Jacoby Brissett with Bailey Zappi? Still need more data before I feel comfortable about the legacy rankings, because apparently Belichick didn't go to the wedding. I don't know. Do you dock Belichick for that, for not being a better friend? Again, I don't know. Cerruti could probably comment on that a little bit later. Right now, Brady's yards per attempt is kind of low, but it's been low before, so that's not the thing that jumps out. I think, to be fair to Tampa, if we're still hanging on to what this team could look like in the second half of the season, the O-line has been juggled all over the place. The receivers have not been consistent enough. It's another game where they look dead offensively, and then they're a 2-point conversion, potentially pulling this off again. We saw the same thing against Green Bay. It didn't work either time. But Leonard Fournette is their leading receiver right now in receptions. But Tampa's still in the NFC South, and they're still in first place, and they'd actually be a 3 seed today because of that. So as bad as that's looked, I'm still more worried about the Rams because their O-line's a mess. They're 27th in yards per play. They're actually behind the Houston Texans. Their number 2 receiver is Ben Skoranek as far as reception totals, and Stafford with another pick 6. He's 6'8" on the TD interception split. I don't know how that gets fixed, and I'm more worried about what their division can look like if everybody else is right, more so than the NFC South. Number 3, we mentioned Green Bay in the offense. Now, this game is actually a little fluky. You get a block kick, block punt, but there's some stuff going on with Rodgers here that is real, and that is his problems with the deep ball. Let's go and take a look at the next-gen stats. Rodgers on balls with 20-plus air yards. All right, so that's 20-plus yards in the air past the line of scrimmage. From 2019 to 21, he completed 36.5% of these passes. All right, these are his deep shots. That's a good number. His touchdown interception split was 28-4. His QB rating was 116. This season, he's completing only 20% of those passes with 0 touchdowns prior to the Jets game. He did get one yesterday, and 1 pick, and his QB rating was 35. He was 2-7 on those throws. But the excuse very easily could be the thumb injury. We saw that it was taped. We saw that Jordan Love was warming up on the sideline. So that'd actually be the kind of injury where you hope it's the thumb, because Rodgers has not even been close to being the same guy, and no Adams on those throws, which changes a lot. And that's after losing to the Giants and Jets back-to-back weeks where you're thinking, should I be excited if I'm a Giants fan? Should I be excited? Look, the Jets, you should just be thrilled they won at Lambeau, all right? Like, that wasn't supposed to happen. But Green Bay, whoever they are this week, this is not the Green Bay of last year and the assumed Green Bay team with Rodgers. That's still a really tough out. Number 4, moving on to the New York teams. The Jets would be a 5 seed today. They're 4-2. Their wins are against Brissett, Kenny Pickett, Skylar Thompson, and then again Rodgers. So there's no part of me where this should be misconstrued as like, yeah, you beat the Packers. Well, I guess it is sounding like that. You beat the Packers, but whatever. All right. Maybe Rodgers is really banged up. But you won, and you're the Jets. So you haven't had a lot to hang your hat on recently. But we can find a way, and the NFL community does tend to do this a little bit, where when the quarterback that you're not sure about, which usually means when you're not sure about, they're not going to be that good, more often than not, right? There's very few times where 2 or 3 years in, you're like, oh, this guy ended up being awesome. Right? It can happen. It doesn't happen that often. And that's more the case with Daniel Jones. It's way too soon on Zach Wilson. But if Zach Wilson in a loss completed 10 of 18 passes, people are talking about Zach Wilson in a negative way on a Monday in local New York talk shows. They're being like, this guy, all right? He went 10 of 18, and that's why it was a little bit fluky. They get the win, that's fine. And again, that Jets defense looks like it's real. It's top 10 in a lot of stats right now. The Giants on the other side, that's an incredible comeback against Baltimore. And as great as Lamar was in the first month where he was MVP, of the AFC that first month, he's had a few games now where, you say, hey, he's missing some throws. That last pick was brutal. But look, Mahomes had a brutal pick as well. At the end of the game, it can happen. And the Giants come back. We've talked to Ted Wynn about the stuff that they're doing. They're just trying to keep things a little bit more in check. But Daniel Jones has gone 3 games without a touchdown. I think he's had over 200 yards just once in a game. So nice wins for teams that we didn't expect much from. We knew the Giants' schedule was going to be easy, the way the NFC East lined up strengths of schedule-wise against everybody else. The Jets being 4-2 in itself is just sort of a miracle based on expectations. So it's kind of good. I guess you could just say straight up it's good. But don't let the wins trick you into thinking that you have at quarterback. Wilson too early, Jones, I'm not changing my mind. The last thing I want to get to, number 5, Jack Easterby. Let go today by the Houston Texans. This guy's got an unbelievable career. I'm going to tell you a story. So he was the character coach with Kansas City in 2011, the team chaplain. He was with the Pats for 6 years. And then he all of a sudden got hooked up with Cal McNair, ownership with the Houston Texans, where he then oversaw personnel, like real NFL front office stuff, once Bill O'Brien was gone. Now, Nick Caserio was there as well, so I don't know that he necessarily had the final say on this stuff, but he was involved in all these things, and I believe, from what I'd heard, he'd sold himself on, like, look, I've been around the past 6 years, the Belichick process, all these different things, like, I can help. And he got close enough to ownership to get this power and have a title that nobody ever saw coming. Like, when he got that gig, I talked to a couple different Pats people that were like, wait, what? Like, he's like doing their draft board and shit. Like, that's weird. Nice guy. Hell of a nice guy. But that's weird. And it reminds me of a lesson. This isn't a secret to people that have been listening to me for a long time. Maybe people that, just caught the show the last couple of years. When I started out, I didn't want to be on the air. Right? I didn't want to be on the air. I had real no desire for it. I wanted to work in a front office. And when I sent out, a million resumes and all this stuff, story I've told them too many times, I was strictly about, well, how can I work for a team? And the irony of how it all came together is that the one minor league baseball team that wanted to hire me because I was going to do sales, they were like, we'll put you on the air for a couple innings. And I knew how hard it was to get on the air, especially back then where you can't just buy a microphone now and be like, hey, I'm on the air. To get somebody to actually say, I want you to talk on the air for real on purpose, and there's going to be a check every 2 weeks for it. That was an incredibly hard thing to do. So I thought, all right, if these guys are offering me this, which doesn't make any sense, and that's, again, a very long story, then I'll just go ahead and do that, throw it on the resume, and what'll happen. But I'll try to work, somewhere in the gray area on some of the personnel stuff. But there's no personnel stuff when you're at minor league baseball. They're like, look, we just want to sell everything, sell tickets, sell ads, and the only time the minor league team is asked about like a player, it's like, is he a drunk or a dick? And I wasn't in charge of that. So anyway, I moved to Boston, and I still really want to work for a basketball team. Okay. That before I was like, maybe I'd work for a baseball team. I mean, that's how locked in I was with all of my skills. I was like, maybe I'll do front office for baseball. Maybe I'll do it for basketball. I mean, again, it didn't really make any sense. Nobody believed in it, and it didn't happen anyway. So we don't have to worry about it. But I met with an NBA GM, and I basically was like, how do I get in? I don't want to be on the air. How do I get in? And he's like, really, the thing you have to do is recruit ownership. Again, I'm 27, and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? In my head, he goes, you need to find out who the owners are and get to know them. And if you can't get to them, find people. If this is really what you want to do, your lifelong dream, find the people that would potentially own a team and get in their ear. He's like, that's probably the only way that you're going to be able to do it. You didn't play anywhere. You didn't coach anywhere. You've never worked anywhere. You bring almost nothing to the table. So your best bet is to find a way to recruit ownership. And I left the lunch going, I think it's great this guy took the time to do that. Much appreciated, something somebody did for me 20 years ago. And Can't believe the guy took the time to take that lunch. I left as confused as I was like, what do I do now? Like, I just start asking people if they're rich enough and want to buy a team one day, and I start telling them how smart I am about basketball shit. Like, that makes, again, 20 years later, I'm on the air. So it didn't work out. Easterby's the fucking king of this, man. Because that's what he did. That's exactly what he did. Nobody could figure it out. Have you seen some of the videos of him talking? Like, again, he seems like a really nice guy. If you're a team chaplain, like, there's a way that you're connecting to people. But that's what he did. And he almost pulled this off. Or I guess you could say he did pull it off. But the problem is, for any organization, especially something that's this important, that's why fans, and there can be so many struggles about what a team should or shouldn't do and what it really means, because it feels more like a public trust than private ownership. And there's this emotional attachment to it that's beyond any other corporation, right? It's a difficult relationship because it should be more clear, but it isn't clear. And the reason it isn't clear is because it matters so much, which is actually a good thing for business. But if you have a team that you own, you're like, yeah, let's give this guy a shot. He's been bugging me. He hung out with Belichick. He walked around in Pat's hoodies. We'll figure this out. To put yourself in that situation is something you would think most teams would want to avoid, but not impossible. So keep trying, kids.